Which one?
Okay. Right, so hello. Guess where I work. My name is Mike. I have about 5 years of experience with software development. I've also been a teacher. I studied in the UK, that's the English, as a game developer. And I've been in Romania for about 2 years. I'm at my second job. Nagarro is my second job. Here are some contact details. You might want them for later. They're not going to be at the end, they're just at the beginning so I can present myself easier. Today I will be talking about design thinking. How many of you have heard of design thinking? Okay. How many of the ones who heard about it have used it? Oh, cool. Okay, cool. Great. Right. Design thinking is a step, sort of kind of, within the whole Agile spectrum, but at the very, very beginning. So this is a step you would like to do when you basically go to your client to gather requirements and specifications. You go to your client and you apply this, you apply design thinking principles in order to better understand your client's needs. I am in no way certified to give this talk since I'm a developer, I'm not a designer, but the whole point of design thinking is that there are elements and processes taken from the design world since the 50s and 60s all around to today, and they are kind of cross-platform and they're very used nowadays for development. This is the agenda. I forgot about this slide. We're going to talk about what it is and why it is. Kind of covered that a little bit. How it's done, go for the steps, how it fits into the Agile, the landscape, and a bunch of conclusions. Everyone okay so far? So what is it and why it's so? In a nutshell, I really like this quote that I've dug while researching about design thinking. Design thinking is essentially a problem-solving approach crystallized in the field of design, which combines a user-centered perspective with rational and analytical research with the goal of creating innovative solutions. So from here, we can say that it is an approach. Bright. It is problem-solving. It was crystallized in the field of design, like I mentioned. And it's very, 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 very user-centered. In a bigger nutshell, it is an iterative process, which means that it goes back and forth and all around and around. The main points of it is it seeks to understand the user and their needs, to challenge assumptions. I'm gonna define these later on, what they all mean. To redefine problems, identify alternative strategies and solutions to whatever it is that you're trying to figure out for your client. It is a way of thinking and working. I'll cover this at the end in one of the shortcomings of it, that it is basically just a way of thinking. And it's a collection of hands-on methods. So, how did we get here? Quick timeline. 1959, this dude called John E. Arnold, he was the first person to use the term design thinking in his book Creative Engineering. This is a time in the late 50s and early 60s when computers weren't that big of a thing and everyone was doing, I think it was you who mentioned that computers started off in the field, the construction, yes, urban development kind of field, right? So that's why we have terms like, I don't know, like design thinking and stuff like that, and yeah. Basically this dude, he taught creative stuff. I don't know exactly what they're called, like a creative, not thinking, not design. This is creative mindset at MIT and Stanford in like the late 50s, and then in 59 he published this book. In 65, there's another guy called L. Bruce Archer who was concerned with the systematic process of design. That means, again, really olden times. He was concerned with how to have a systematic approach in designing specifically for urban development at the time, but how can we combine different kind of fields together and use design in all of them and kind of aggregate all of them into design. If you have any questions, just interrupt me, it's fine. Herbert A. Simon, first ever to talk about design as a way of thinking. So he was the guy who said that we need to put together, we live in a time where we need to put together where design and management are getting so close together as fields that they're kind of blurry, and he foresaw that at some point in years and years and years, they will kind of be very blurry. They're kind of the same thing, with interchangeable. They're kind of relaxing on each other, or something like that. 1980s, Brian Lawson, How Designers Think, began generalizing the concept of design thinking. So he was the first one to kind of talk about it, and you need to think in a more designy way, and do this thing that I've been mentioning of kind of taking all these fields and doing design with them and stealing things from the designers who back up until that point were just like making things pretty, design, the classical sense. So this guy was like, we need to generalize, we need to make it more accessible to everyone. 1987, Pete Rowe writes, Design Thinking, hey, the first book describes methods and approaches used by urban planners, like I've been saying. So this is what we do in urban planning, and this is how we can use it for all the other fields. Then, 1991, I'm skipping a few years. There's a lot of things that happened. You can go and check the wiki article. There's a long list of timelines of things happening in between these years, but these are kind of what I felt most relevant were. So 1991, first symposium on research and design. And there's this company called IDEO. Apparently, IDEO is one of the biggest design consultancies in the world. And that's 1991 was when it got funded. And they heavily use design thinking. And then lastly, 2005, Stanford, they made a kind of branch or separate kind of mini school called D School, funny name, whose I'm assuming comes from design. And they actually start teaching engineering students design thinking as a formal method. So I guess my only validation for being here is that I also took not that course, but a course back at my previous job on design thinking. That's where I got a whole and then this whole thing, and that's why I know what it is and know about it because I use it. The thing before we move on is that there are a lot of people, including this first guy right here, who implements it in different ways. So ideally, there are about 5 steps in design thinking. This guy right here, Arnold, our friend here, he had about 4 steps. The last of which was something about how to make it more marketable, like the product, the final product. Not the final product that you implement, but right in between when we finish the design and when we kind of start developing. I'm not talking waterfall, it's just a generalization. Also, IDEO has a different standard of design thinking from D-School. D-School seems to be the one that's most popular, these 5 steps. So these are the ones that I'm going to cover. These are the ones that I've learned. So, we all good up to now? Any questions, anything, feel free to... Okay, so these are the 5 steps. Empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. Pretty obvious what they all mean. Now, because design thinking is very user-focused, there's a lot of empathy going on. A lot of empathy going on. Now, use cases for design thinking, we're talking here about people who go to clients at the very beginning of a project, right? You go there and you're like, hey, what's up? What do you guys do? So let me talk to your people and find out what they want to do and how they want to do it and what are your problems. And I really want to connect with you as a human being. This kind of hippie stuff, which is great. It works sometimes. So the first step is empathize. Gain emphatic understanding of the problem you're trying to solve. So, you're a consulting firm that does development and have a design team, or maybe you're designers or developers like me who are trained in design thinking. You go with your client and you're like, hey, we want to make a new project, or we have this problem we're trying to solve with our current project. We need new features, we need a new thing, we need something to innovate. Design thinking is very focused on innovation. So you go there and you're like, okay, cool, what is it you're trying to solve, trying to do? Now, the thing you do in this phase is observe, engage, and empathize with people to understand their experience and their motivations. So again, this whole thing is a process. It's a set of ideas, a set of methodologies. It's not something incredibly quantifiable like something like Agile or Kanban. You don't have that many kind of, this is the way to do it. there aren't, this is the way to do it. It's just a bunch of, hey, here are a bunch of ways you can do things. If you want to use them, if not, you can, chop off whatever you want. That's why you have so many different ways of doing it. So you go there and you're trying to understand their motivations. What is it they're trying to do? What is it trying to achieve? Gain deeper personal understanding of the issues involved. So what kind of issues the client is facing with their clients or with whatever they're trying to build. Very important thing is to set aside your own assumptions about the world. So design thinking is very focused on reframing your mindset and thinking outside the box. It's very focused on, okay, I know I have 10, 15 years of the experience in this field and I'm really certain I know all these things, but screw all of that. I need to start fresh. I need to go with a blank mind to this client, be like, let's explore, let's relearn everything together so you can kind of think outside the box, or just take a bunch of shrooms, I don't know, whichever is easiest. You need to gain insight into the user's needs. A very cool thing that I want to touch on this that I didn't include, just a fun fact, because it's so broad and there's so many processes involved, a really cool thing that I've learned is personas. So personas is when you go to the client and you try, as part of this whole kind of forget everything that we know, let's do something new. Personas is a thing where you define the type of user that would use your product, right? So you're a company who wants to make a new product, you hire me to do your design thinking and come up with whatever you want us to build for you. And one of the things I do is I do personas, which is, it's very kind of post-it notes and markers and stuff like that. It's kind of, hey, here's George. He is he works at a supermarket and he might be interested in using your application that you kind of are trying to figure out. These are the kind of things that George does in his free time. These are the kind of things that George would like out of your product. So you kind of get a better idea of the different sorts of people that might use your product. And it's kind of helpful. In the exercises we did in the course, it was actually helpful. It was pretty cool to have these kind of new ideas. And you're working in teams usually. This is very team focused, and ideally teams from different kind of fields, programmers, designers, management, whatever. And it's really cool to come up with these personas because we work with all these cross-domain people who can come up with things you probably never thought about. Me as a developer, yeah.
So, Mike.
Yes.
English or
Whichever. I'll answer in English.
Care ar fi diferența între target group și user personas?
Can you elaborate on target
Well,
group?
target group is something that usually the market department creates, and basically it's
right.
you can find this.
Who's our target audience?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
I can answer that if you want, if I can. So there's actually two different types of personas. There are proto-personas, which are user profiles that we actually invent, and we base them solely on our assumptions, and we only use them at the beginning. And there are actual personas that are used on research. They are based on research, and they are actually a way of delivering research results for people to be able to understand. And usually when you create personas, they are not an example of an actual person. They have multiple qualities and traits from a certain group of people. So a persona, a certain George, isn't representing an actual George, he's representing the whole collection of people in that category. So, and why you use them is because we are not our users, and we try to empathize with them, and we try to reinforce them by giving them a name, by giving them an occupation, by trying to make it more plausible. So if you want, we can discuss this again. I don't want
That was so beautifully said. You want to do this? That was really good.
If you want to join my meetup.
There you go. We got blackjack. Okay. Yeah, thank you. That was really, that sounds a lot like the textbook.
Shameful
Plugin, yeah. Is that cool?
I think also it would be useful to mention why we are using user persona, because when studies shows that when you empathize with your users, you usually do a lot more than you would with the target group. So once I know you, I will work to please you somehow, a little more.
Yeah. It's like the classical, how people use software and someone made like, I don't know, a photo editing software that's really like 3 buttons and you do it and people loved it because it was simple, and then you had a developer who had like a bajillion buttons and they're like, I'm a developer, I know all the things, and people, users are like, I don't know, this is too complicated for me. But the developer knew everything about it. This is a case that I've heard, I don't know exactly which software it is, but it was like a thing they taught us at school.
Every software at some point in time.
Sorry?
Every piece of software at some point in time.
Bloatware. Yeah, just a thing here. It's your band-aid thing. Right. The second step is define. So you went out there, you talked with your clients, you talked with your users, you empathize, you gathered a lot of data. And the next step is define. You put it together, and I don't really want to read all of those, you can read them yourselves, but basically the most important thing out of define is to define the problems. To define, what was the example? There's an example of, in a very empathetic way, or empathic way, I don't know whatever the word is. So the example was, we're a bakery and we need to make 5% profit. Well, no, you shouldn't say that. You should say, how can we, I don't know, we're a vegan bakery or something, or super healthy. You don't say, how do we increase profit by 5%? No, you go and you say, how can we sell more healthy products to our client base who are really going to enjoy them and also make profit? So that's kind of, you define, this is a problem, right? This is a problem. How do we do this? We don't know how to do this. That's why you hire us, whatever, design thinking people. You say, how do we do these things? So you have to establish those at this step, at this stage, this level, right? So human-centric problems and core problems and features, functions, elements, anything that you define that can be a problem that you are trying to solve. Brings us to step 3, ideate. Ideate is trying to find solutions to those problems, basically, in a nutshell. This is the part where you encourage thinking outside the box to identify new solutions. This is the part where you do brainstorming sessions with all of these buzzwords that, apart from the first one, I've never heard of. And you need to get as many ideas out there. And fun fact, at my first job, we were working with the European Commission on research projects, and I didn't even know what design thinking was in 2014. That turns out, I learned what this is, and I'm like, oh cool, I actually worked on a ideation machine presented as a horse racing game. I don't have any screenshots of it because it was never deployed anywhere. It was like a research project. Let's ship it to the EU Commission, done, no one ever hears about it ever again. But it was like this whole ensemble of creative kind of collaboration tools, and one of them was called Hat Party, because you have to wear different hats and try to be someone you're not. Try to impersonate different people and create solutions to these problems as a horse racing game. So you'd like type in, problem is how do we increase 5%, whatever, market share or something, buzzwords. And then you go in and like, I believe I could do it like this and like this and like this. And then it was like, first step, where you generate as many ideas as possible. There's a ranking, and your horse would go further along. And then you had like 2 voting stages, which were like weighted. And people get to vote which ideas they like more or not. So that was cool, because I never thought that I was actually working on one of these things, which is pretty cool. It's brainstorming. The penultimate step is prototyping. It's hard to guess what this step is, but you basically take all these solutions that you've found and you try to make prototypes. The idea of these prototypes is, we're still on the coding phase, by the way. We're still in the designing phase, like very early on. You make inexpensive, scaled-down versions of products or features. And of course I did. There was a really cool tool that we use called Marvel, which lets you drag and drop boxes and circles and text boxes and stuff like that, or take pictures, which is what we did. So we kind of went up to got one of these white papers and drew some some back button and like forward and like a username and screens and charts and stuff. And you go with your phone, take a picture, and you make a few of those screens, kind of find a flow. And then the app just lets you kind of drag and drop, like, if you tap that back button that you drew, it'll take you to this screen or that screen or this other screen, which is super, took us an hour to make an app. Which is super cool, because the whole point of this is to be fast, but concise and inexpensive. So that was cool. The way other people do it is paper maches, or I don't know, post-it notes, or whatever, or presentations. And this helps you get a better idea while you're doing this of, do we actually fix the problems with the solutions that we proposed? This is where the iteration step comes in, because the last step is testing. So the last step is, okay, we have these prototypes that we built, let's go and test them. Do we like them? Do they solve the issues at hand? Do they not? Let's go back, ID again, find more problems, tweak old problems, find new solutions, all that. All makes sense. It's not rocket science. It's just, I find that these kind of things personally, like design thinking, are kind of things that you feel like, yeah, duh. But you never didn't think about them until someone comes and you're like, oh, you have to do this course on design thinking. That was me. And they're like, okay, I'll go and do it. And I'm like, oh yeah, I never thought about these things. They're not hard. It's just, you don't really think about it, especially as a developer. I don't get to do any of these things. I'm like, throw it in mid-project, go do. So this is cool, because then this gives me a better perspective, and the whole empathy thing gives me a better perspective. Like, okay, I'm this nerdy guy with the hoodie coding, but maybe I can do it differently. Maybe I can do it more user-centric. Maybe I can help people with my code and with my features and my products. Boom. How does this fit in? Not a lot to say, since I'm not the Agile expert over here, but you all are. Apparently, this is a customer problem part right before Agile. Don't ask me what this is. Did very little reading on it, but boom, there we go. Simpler one. This doesn't have that thing that I don't know about. But I didn't like this one because this has different steps than the other one. The other one had my steps that I wanted to present. But still, it kind of makes sense because you go in all these flows, all these beautiful circles, and all this whole beautiful thing. It's called Agile and Scrum and Kanban, and we all love it. And I do. I'm not an expert, yeah, it helps because it's right there. And then even when you start coding and stuff, you don't, it's not drop down waterfall. We did our design thinking, we defined it, go code it. It's more like a cool prototype. I mean, the prototype can be mock-ups of the code, or you start coding it and do the fast-paced iteration, sprints. Okay, conclusions and takeaways. I decided to start with shortcomings first because I want to end on a positive note. So, what I found doing all this reading on design thinking, it all sounds beautiful, it all sounds hippie and nice. Most problems come from implementation. Because it's such a vague kind of thing, it's hard to change a company culture that does it a different way to kind of rethink it. It's hard to have someone who's big or something, so we do things this way, and we've always done it this way, and it works, to go like, hey, when you go next time to your customer, can you try and be more empathetic with them and try to kind of get, be more friendly with them and stuff. Like, that's hard to do. And that's fair. I mean, in the end, it all comes to delivering and making money. So, But yeah, it's also hard to deliver properly. Like, I just told you all these things about personas, and then here comes an expert who's like, no, actually, that's not how it's done. I'm like, okay, well, see, it's hard to define, it's hard to deliver it properly. I mean, I would have probably gone in and made my startup and be like, I did it all wrong all these years. I'm just joking. I have this one, focus on exploration, exploitation. These are my words, because I used to do a bunch of work with kind of A/B testing and one-armed slot machine bandits algorithms, where there's a huge trade-off between exploration and exploitation. And when you have one of those companies, I say that loosely. When you have people who are like focused on like needing to make money, we don't have time to do all these hippie things and do all these workshops with the clients and all that. That's a lot of exploitation. And design thinking forces you to do a lot of exploration, to do all of let's go and talk and discuss and reiterate and do it and before we actually deliver anything or start making anything. So, trade-offs. Yeah, it involves a lot more doing than just thinking. But some of the strong points, I love that this always shows up in every single design thinking course ever. It's this kid who gets stuck, and like the whole beginning of the video is like his dad is like, "I'm kicking you out of the thing," and it's like, "How have you tried thinking outside of the box?" And then kid goes, "Boom, I'm out." So, yeah, that's kind of the whole purpose of it. It encourages. and the best part is with the foot, it kind of goes like, nope. Yeah, so it's iterative, flexible, collaborative, focus on the process of it, because it is a process, loosely termed. Really cool that it encourages cross-domain collaboration because you try to explore so much. Really good, like I mentioned, have people from all these various fields chipping in together. Human domain-centric. I use domain-centric because of what was mentioned with the whole layers and all that, and domain-driven design and all these beautiful, beautiful developer things that kind of correlate to some way to kind of map from the design level to the development level. It doesn't matter which one's up or down, but kind of they map really nicely because you go in and you find out your customer's domain before you start actually implementing, which is nice. Fits well, like we've very, very briefly demonstrated in the Agile model. And it's aimed at innovation because of all these hippie new things, the way of doing it. You innovate. So my message is try it or don't, whatever, just, you know. And thank you.